Well, I'm Cameron Schwalbach, if you guys didn't know me. I'm the Paleontology Collections Manager for the Cincinnati Museum Center. I like to think of myself as the fossil librarian. I do a lot of organizing and a lot of reorganizing and labeling. This segment's part of our ongoing Conversation with the Curator series, in which a series of videos in which CMC curatorial staff engage with you, the public, and provide lessons on a variety of topics, not just natural history, but we're doing this in the historical and art realms as well. I'm coming to you today to give you a diving lesson. This might be a little surprising to some of you since we're in Cincinnati and there's no beaches nearby. But this isn't your normal diving lesson. The sea we're going to be diving into is an ancient one, and the diving we'll be doing is for fossils. So around 450 million years ago, during a time called the late Ordovician Period, the region surrounding Cincinnati was inhabited by a thriving marine ecosystem in a shallow subtropical sea. You can imagine this kind of like the Bahamas, although it's not a perfect analogy, but the weather and the water temperature would be about the same. So this sea had no fish. Because they hadn't evolved in this part of the world yet. Fish themselves were just in their earliest stages of evolution. But in our ocean, we did have an abundant and diverse community of invertebrate organisms in a variety of different environments. Some of these organisms you might recognize, like clams, snails, jellyfish, corals, starfish. Others like brachiopods, bryozoans, crinoids, and trilobites might be new to you. This scene I'm showing is a reconstruction done by John Agnew. It's an oil painting of these animals that I've been listing. You can see here. These crinoids are these stalked flower-looking organisms. They're actually animals. This guy crawling on the ground and also being eaten by this large cone-like organism is a trilobite. The squid-like organism with a cone is an odaloid. So you can see it looks kind of reminiscent of tropical environments today, but some different organisms there. Fast forward 450 million years, and today we see the remains of these organisms preserved as fossils in the rocks, exposed all throughout the entire Cincinnati region. Anytime you see rocks poking out, anytime you drive by a road cut like this is going to be filled with fossils, and they're going to be preserved from that environment. So take a step back. In case you weren't aware, fossils are the remains or traces of living organisms, or once living organisms. People often think of these as plants or animals, but they could also be fungi or bacteria or other single-celled living things. Anything that lived in the geological past and is preserved in the crust of the earth is considered a fossil, if it's older than about 10,000 years. It's the cutoff date. Right here, you might notice that I'm showing you dinosaurs. We don't have any dinosaurs in Cincinnati. This is because, one, it's the wrong type of rock. We have a marine environment. Dinosaurs were terrestrial animals. Two, our rocks are not of the right age. Our rocks are Ordovician in age, which is much, much older than the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs were alive in the Mesozoic. I chose to use this little animation, or this diagram, to show the process of fossilization and paleontologists digging up. So the fossils in Cincinnati area were discovered long ago. Professionals and amateurs have been studying them actively and collecting them for over 150 years, probably closer to 175. So anybody from somebody who doesn't know anything about fossils and sees a cool shell in the rocks, picking it up, to professional researchers at UC in the Museum Center. All through that time, we've been discovering new things, finding new fossils, learning more about the world. And the abundant exposures in this long history of fossil collecting have made the Cincinnati region literally world famous for their abundant and diverse, well-preserved fossils. I've run trips and people come from Germany and China and Africa and all over just to see our fossils and come research them. On this picture right here is a picture of fossil collectors in the early 1900s. You can see they're not dressed in very outdoor attire. They got some dresses here, some blouses. But that just shows you the long and extensive history of collecting in the area. So why study fossils? Well, it's obvious fossils are pretty cool. Anything preserved in the rocks is going to be cool. People have thought they were cool for thousands of years. But they're much more than that. Fossils and the rocks they're in provide evidence of how the fossils themselves lived when they were alive and how they interacted with each other in their environments. Paleontologists collect and examine fossils and use this evidence in order to reconstruct ancient ecosystems and learn about the history of the Earth. And if paleontologists do this little by little throughout the world, collectively we learn about the history of the Earth as a whole, and the evolution of life and things like that. So before we get into collecting fossils, I wanted to go into a little bit about the geologic history of Cincinnati. So I said before, during late Ordovician times, this region was in the southern subtropics. Here's a map of the world as it appeared during the late Ordovician period. This continent that I have highlighted it's a paleo continent called Laurentia. It's pretty much now we know it as North America, but it's had some more land added since then. Laurentia during this time was flooded from high global sea levels, and what is called an epicontinental sea flooded the continent. Epicontinental just means on top of the continent. So this sea was on continental rock rather than on oceanic rock, as our seas are today. There's no environments like this today because our sea levels are substantially lower, but the Bahamas, like I said earlier, are often used as a comparison for their similar environments. But there are major differences. But if you've been to the Bahama Banks and you've been in the water, you can imagine yourself in the Cincinnati Sea. Just no fish. So this sea was very shallow. It wasn't as deep as the oceans we're thinking of. It probably didn't get any deeper than about 200 feet at the deepest. The seafloor itself was a gently sloping ramp. What we call a depositional ramp because sediments were being deposited here. This ramp dipped down to the north such that at any one time there were somewhat shallower environments in central Kentucky. You hear on the map in the little A, B, and C ranges on my map. As you travel north into Ohio and Indiana, the water gets deeper and deeper gradually. And as that happens, the sediment changes and the environments change. The sediments were being eroded from a large mountain building event to the southeast called the Taconic orogeny. It's in approximately the same location as the Appalachian Mountains are today, but they weren't. This was far before the beginning of the formation of the Appalachians. Sediments were eroded off of this mountain building chain and deposited on the ramp in this area, where they intermixed. The sediments were silts and muds, and these silts and muds intermixed with locally produced carbonates. Carbonates like calcite are produced by animals that secrete calcium carbonate to make things like shells. Things like clams and brachiopods and corals all make skeletons of this material. And when this material gets broken down and deposited in the sediment, it forms limestone. So when you drive around Cincinnati and you see these alternating layers of gray shale and lighter gray limestone sticking out, these are alternations of sediment coming in from the mountain building event and sediment being produced by the local organisms. These mud and silts coming from the mountain building event we call siliciclastics. Siliciclastics, we just call them that. Clastics are eroded material, eroded rock material, and siliciclastics are eroded rock material with a silica component. Silica is the major component of quartz. So this depositional ramp had lots of different paleo environments on it. If you go to the beach, you'll realize that there's different organisms and it's a different environment on the shoreline than it is in the water a good distance. This is the same is true for environments in the Cincinnati. And we had everything from paratidal environments, which are environments by the seashore and above, to subtidal environments that were very rich with organisms, to offshore environments that they were very calm and didn't have much wave action and had a different set of organisms. There's also shoals and lagoons and tidal inlets and other microenvironments that are also present in this area. Each of these environments, just like today, contain a different community of organisms, and we see these environments today as a specific association of rock types and community of organisms. Just for an example, shallow subtidal environments would give you, there's a lot of wave action and a lot of organisms and a lot of larger grained material coming in because it's much closer to the shoreline. Whereas in the offshore environments, you have no wave action other than during the very most intense hurricanes. And the sediment being deposited is much smaller in grain size in the form of mud because it can be carried much farther with less energy. So we can go today and find each of these paleo environments by looking at a specific association of rocks and fossils. So over time, as these organisms were living, storms and hurricanes kind of pummeled the region periodically and buried these organisms in large blankets of sediment. Over time, these sediments kept coming in, burying everything, and millions of years of sedimentation, burial, and compaction eventually lithified these sediments into rock. If you can imagine just an immense amount of weight pressing down and squeezing out all of the water and the interstitial spaces between the grains until those grains are right up against each other and the sediment is no longer loose, it's now compacted together. That is called lithification. It's just the formation of rocks. So the reason that we see these rocks and organisms were buried and lithified. So how do we see them on the surface? The reason that we see them on the surface is because of a geologic structure called the Cincinnati Arch. The Cincinnati Arch is a large bulge in what was once flat rock layers formed during a huge mountain building event around 300 million years ago called the Alleghanian orogeny. During this mountain building event, and also in the location of the present day Appalachians, the crust, the mountain where the mountains pushed up, behind the mountains, the crust was pushed down, and then behind that, the crust was pushed up again. Kind of like when you squeeze a carpet and the carpet goes like this. That bulge behind the mountains is the Cincinnati Arch. After the Cincinnati Arch was exposed, millions of years of weathering and erosion removed the top of the arch. So instead of a bulge, it was flat. Now this caused the youngest uppermost layers to be removed down to the center of the arch, leaving the oldest rocks exposed in the center of the Cincinnati Arch near central Kentucky, around Lexington. This is kind of hard to imagine for some people. On a geologic map, it looks like a bullseye. When I explain it, I like to imagine it like one of these jawbreaker candies from the 90s, if you ever had those. If you've never had one, don't bite them. They do not break, hence their name. But you can see this one's broken in half here, and you can see the concentric layers. The innermost one, if you can imagine, being the oldest. And as you go out from the center, their layers get younger and younger. This same structure can be seen on the Cincinnati Arch. And is the reason that all of these rocks and fossils are so well exposed throughout the region. So now that you know a little bit about Cincinnati Arch and its fossils, let's get into the good stuff and how to collect them. But wait, before you go collecting, collecting is a sensitive subject in some areas. You should be aware of the laws and regulations concerning collecting in your state. Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana are pretty lax with collecting because of the abundance and just abundant exposures of fossils, and the fact that they're invertebrates. There are different laws concerning vertebrate and invertebrate fossils. But in any case, these laws and rules are often pretty vague and can differ from state to state. So if you fossil hunt for pleasure, for your own collection, don't cause any damage, and don't sell your fossils, there shouldn't be anything to worry about. But you should still check up on the laws and regulations concerning these activities. Some areas like highways and road cuts along highway ramps are off limits to collectors for safety reasons. This is a good idea. There's lots of highway traffic, and those on the highway are not very concerned with fossil collecting, generally speaking. So they might not see you if you're too close to the road. If your car is parked, they might hit it. There's just lots of danger there. So it's not very smart to collect here. Similarly, collecting on private property, whether it's someone's backyard or a commercial quarry, is illegal without explicit permission from the owner. And taking a fossil from private land without permission is in effect stealing. So if you're gonna go hunting on private land, or if you're not sure whether or not it's private land, you should check and seek permission from the landowner. Okay, so there's a few general rules, in addition to the laws and regulations, that fossil collectors are kind of encouraged to follow. A lot of these rules are unspoken and are concerned mostly about personal safety and the protection of these environment, but they're good to remember in any case. The number one rule is be safe. No matter what, fossil collecting is a fun, relaxing activity and should stay that way. And as long as you're wearing the appropriate safety equipment and you're aware of where you are and the dangers around you, you should be good. Another thing is leave gates and property as you find them. People are often very accepting of fossil collecting on their property if you're not going to be doing damage and if you're just doing it for a fun time. Even in this case, if you're operating gates or doing anything else on other people's property, you should leave the gates as you find them. These gates could be and probably are in place for a reason. And if you leave them differently than you found them, then nobody's going to know, and maybe an animal will get out or something. You should be protecting plants and animals. Don't be destroying plants and chopping down trees. Don't be disrupting animals or throwing rocks, God forbid. Just be courteous of and aware that you're not the only one in the area. You should also take all litter away with you. This is not only your litter. Fossil collecting, you will find a lot of litter. And if you have a glove in a bag to keep your hands clean and safe, it's great to pick up and get rid of. Any little bit helps. This next one, consider other people, kind of goes along with plants and animals. Don't just be throwing rock bits on people's driveways or roads. Just consider that other people might be there after you and that you should keep it just as you found it. This last one is not for everybody, but if you do take a dog with you, fossil collecting is an outdoor activity and is very enjoyable with companionship. But if you bring a dog, keep it under control. There's lots of distractions out fossil collecting that your dog will be very excited about, I'm sure. So where do you collect fossils? It sounds a little obvious, but the best place to start looking for fossils is on a map, specifically a geological map. The best thing to do is look at several maps, as well as guidebooks. And a visit to your local museum wouldn't be bad either. Any amount of research is going to help you when finding fossils. Because the more you know about the fossils, the more you'll be able to determine where they might be best be preserved. So this right here is a geological map showing the bedrock beneath Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana. It looks a bit confusing, so let's look at a cleaner version made by our invertebrate paleontology curator, Brenda Hunda. If we'll pop up here. Here we go. So this is the same map, just slightly cleaned up and the colors changed a little bit. On geological maps like this one, each color represents a different age of rock. Fossils are nearly always found in sedimentary rocks. So the first thing you want to do on your map is locate the sedimentary rocks. Now I didn't label these explicitly on here because lucky for us, all of the bedrock underlying this region is sedimentary rock. So anywhere you find rock exposed is going to be fossiliferous. That being said, there are glacial deposits here. So if you come across some glacial rock, those might not be sedimentary, but those will be very apparent to you. Glacial rocks are often round boulders, and there's sometimes granite and other metamorphic and igneous rocks. They come from Canada and Michigan. The rocks that we're in were all deposited during the late Ordovician period. So what we also have to do is find the layers of rocks that are of that age. Lucky for us again, all of the rocks in this region are Ordovician at age 2. On this map, this light pink area in the middle, everything exposed in that area is Ordovician in age. So all of the Cincinnati fossils that you'll be reading about during your research will be found somewhere within here. This area goes from about just south of Lexington, Kentucky, all the way north to Dayton, Ohio about, east to Maysville, Kentucky, and west to about Madisonville or Madison, Indiana. So it's a pretty large area. So the rocks are pretty much anywhere you look. The next thing to do, well, in most places, this rock is unfortunately covered by soil, trees, roads, buildings, anything else that could be covering it up. Considering that fossils are most easily collected at the surface, the next thing to do would be determine where these rocks are exposed. Now this can happen by natural processes such as weathering and erosion, or by human activity, like building roads or digging for quarries and things like that. And there's a few areas in Cincinnati that might be of use to you. Cliffs and bluffs are abundant in the area. We have a lot of shale and mudstone in the outcrops, which causes a lot of landslides, which exposes a lot of rock in the sides of hills. Outcrops of bare rock occur where water and wind can pick up sediment continuously and prevent soil formation that would eventually cover the exposure. So if you see rocks eroding out of the hillside and you have the means to do it, go check them out. Another place would be river, creek, and stream valleys. These are some of the best places because creeks, there's an abundance of rivers, creeks, and streams in this part of the country. And these gradually cut downwards, exposing layers of rock as they go. So if you follow any one stream, you can follow the rock layers down or up as you see fit to find the fossils you're looking for. Be careful if you collect here because riverbanks can be steep and slippery and difficult to access, particularly after large rains when the water levels are much higher and the rivers are flowing faster. Be sure to take any safety equipment you might need if you go places like this. Cuttings are some of the most abundant places to collect fossils. By cuttings, I mean artificial valleys cut by humans for roads or railways or other pathways that are blasted into the hillsides. These are very abundant in Kentucky, but also present in Ohio and Indiana. These are some of the best places, like I said, for fossil collecting, but they can also be dangerous. The noise and activity of a busy road is dangerous, but can also be tiring and very distracting. If you're with somebody, holding a conversation can be very hard. Also, a lot of these road cuts are very steep, so if you're not looking, you could be at the bottom and there could be a large overhang above you, which could be very dangerous. So always be aware of what's above your head and any loose rock that could come down. If you collect at these places, definitely be aware of the laws and regulations concerning collecting in your state. For example, there's very different laws in Ohio and Kentucky with respect to collecting on road cuts in some cases. So just ask somebody in the know or do some research to find out. If the site is on private property, always be sure to contact the landowner for permission to collect. Now this last one, quarries and mines, is where some of the best fossil finds have come out of. This is because of the huge amounts of rock we worked, exposed, and removed in large pieces. Usually the larger amount of rock you can remove at once, the better your chance of is finding a good fossil. Now quarries are private properties, so you must get permission from the owner before collecting. And depending on the quarry, these owners could be for or against fossil collecting. It really depends, so you have to do some negotiation. In any case, you have to get permission. Site owners usually have strict rules about collecting so that it doesn't interfere with the operation of their business. So if you are allowed to collect, be aware that you are on their turf. And if you do anything to disrupt their business, then they'll probably just ask you to leave and not come back. And this could ruin it for other fossil collectors, so be courteous of others. Now there's a few places in Cincinnati that are actually built for fossil collecting or dedicated to. For the first timer, Trammel Fossil Park in Sharonville, Ohio might be a good place to start. Trammel is a 10-acre park built for and dedicated to fossil collecting. The park has a hill slope scraped away to expose the rock and has signs detailing information about the site, such as what rock layer you're in, and a lot of informative signs on the fossils of Cincinnati, what you're going to find, how it's there, and things like that. And collecting here is easy. It doesn't require any tools. They actually don't even allow any tools. So it's all surface collecting. So it's a great place to go if you're just looking to get into fossil collecting, or if you've never been there. There's also a couple state parks. Cedar Creek State Park and East Fork State Park are both outside of the city of Cincinnati. Cedar Creek is near Waynesville, Ohio, and East Fork is near Bethel, Ohio. Both of these parks have large man-made reservoir lakes, and adjacent to those lakes, they have large spillways just in case of a flooding event to protect the people downhill. These spillways are very bare rock, very wide areas of bare rock that expose specific layers that allow you for easy surface collecting. Sometimes it's a little overgrown, so you have to pick through some grass, but it's not bad at all. And you can spend an entire day here. It's much larger than Trammel. And all of these three areas have different rocks exposed. So if you went to all three, you'd have a very different collecting experience. So one thing you want to do before you go collecting is plan your trip. You might want to just see some rocks and go out and collect them, and that's great. But I promise if you do some planning, it'll make the difference between a great collecting experience and a somewhat wasted opportunity. One of the best things you can do is talk to other fossil collectors and professional paleontologists in your area. Local fossil groups like the Dry Dredgers, the Kentucky Paleontological Society, and the Indiana Society of Paleontology can provide helpful advice on planning and equipment, what you'll likely find. And they often run field trips to popular collecting sites. So if you don't want to go on your own or you want to be there with somebody who knows what they're doing, you can tag along with a group. It's also a great environment to share experiences with and interact with other dry dredgers, as they're so called. For professional advice, you can contact the geology department of one of your local colleges or universities. I listed a bunch of them here. If you contact any college and university with a geology department, I'm sure they have somebody that's willing to talk to you about your fossil interests. And of course, a visit to your local museum. The Cincinnati Museum Center is an easy and enjoyable way to learn about the local paleontology and see what fossils are actually found in the region. We have myself and our curator of invertebrate paleontology, Brenda Hunda, are both active researchers in the area, and we'd be happy to talk to you about fossil hunting. Another way of gaining experience is going out as a volunteer or on an organized dig by a museum or university. If you're really enthusiastic and have done some research and are ready to take the next step, ask if anybody needs help in the field. A lot of times, field work is a major component of paleontology, and good help is often appreciated. And it can be an invaluable experience to learn from the experts with on-the-job training. Another thing you can do to prepare yourself is research. One of the best things you can do, actually. There's a number of books and professional research papers out there written on Cincinnati paleontology. And the more you get into it, the more there is to read. You can have as dense of a paper as you want, or as simple of an introductory book as you want. I've listed a couple here. Here's Fossils of Ohio and Cincinnati Fossils. These are both little collecting guides or identification help that list fossils not only in the Cincinnati area, but Fossils of Ohio talks about other fossils outside of the Ordovician that are found up farther north near Columbus and Cleveland. Any little background information can go a long way in helping you understand the ancient world. This book right here, A Sea Without Fish, is by Dr. David Meyer and Dr. Richard Davis, and it's a wonderful introduction to the world of Cincinnati fossils. And this book, Cincinnati Fossils, is a great first book for anyone starting out. It's just a small magazine-sized book and gives some great information on which layers you can find rocks in and a little background information on the fossils. So, now that you've done your research, you want to start getting your fossil collecting gear together. Proper protection and safety equipment makes fossil hunting infinitely more pleasurable and rewarding without these items. You probably build your fossil kit over time, and it doesn't have to be expensive. You can start out by using ordinary household items and repurposed tools until you can find proper replacements. The first thing you need to do is find a set of comfortable, weather-appropriate clothes. you're going to be spending a good deal of time outdoors in the sun and rain. So wear layers that allow you to warm and cool your body appropriately. I always recommend long pants because rocks are sharp and there's lots of plants and bugs during field work. For the same reasons, long sleeve shirts are good. They also provide lots of sun protection. And sturdy boots or shoes are also a must. Nobody likes to kick a rock. I've made that mistake a couple times, wearing light gym shoes out to the field. For these same reasons, a work glove is often nice. When you go digging through rocks with your hands, they can get pretty sharp. So a nice pair of rubber-coated work gloves helps. Hat and sunglasses help shield your eyes from the sun and the albedo. Albedo is the reflection of the sun's rays off of the surface, which can also blind you, just like the sun can. So some nice sunglasses with UV protection will make your trip much more enjoyable. If you're somewhere dangerous, like a quarry wall or a road cut, or you're doing a lot of hammering, you might need some additional equipment, like this high visibility vest, helmet, and safety glasses to provide some additional protection. Also, be sure to have your phone with you in case of any accident or injury. You don't want to have to walk back to your car on a busted ankle or drive back home because you forgot your phone and you're hurt. And it's also great for taking pictures and location data too. So to get to the site, you're going to need a few things. At the very least, you're going to need a countryside map with roads and railways and things like that, and some topography to show you hills. Geological map also that shows rock types and ages will also help you in determining where these rocks are exposed at the surface. You can find countryside maps at bookstores, travel centers, or online. I like these little gazetteers because they're in book form, and you can turn your book and have all your maps without forgetting how to fold it back up. It's also a good idea to purchase a geological map from your state's geological survey. This little colored guy right here in the corner is a zoom in of a geological map near Waynesville, Ohio, and each of those colors is a different layer of Ordovician rock with a different association of fossils. So if you're looking for a certain type of fossil, you can go to where these rocks are exposed. There's also a number of smartphone apps for geological maps available, which are definitely worth looking into. But in my opinion, there's nothing that beats an actual tangible map to have. And of course, you'll need a compass to go along with your maps in order to navigate. Map reading is an important skill that anybody should help develop. It's also a good idea to have some guidebooks with you while you read your maps, because the guidebooks will reference a lot of specific information. And this information may not be listed on your map or may just be referenced on your map. So tying the two together will help you determine where to best look for your fossils. So for the first timer, collecting can be as easy as picking up a loose fossil off the ground and putting it in a bag, labeled of course. So if you bring nothing else, bring something to help you carry your finds, like a bag or a plastic baggie. I like to use a small selection of sealable plastic bags. Sandwich bags like these will work just fine. You can use small pieces of newspaper or paper towel to prevent your fossils from breaking. I also like to carry a permanent marker to write on the bag where I found the location data, where I found the fossil. Having a small toolkit can make things much more easy and enjoyable. Like I said, they don't have to be expensive and you don't have to get them all at once, so little by little. I've listed a few of the most important tools here. Maybe the most important tool is your field notebook, because writing down information on your fossils is the most important thing you can do for science. If you forget where your fossil came from, there's not any information associated with it that we can use to determine anything about its environment or how it lived or what it lived with. So it's important to write down where you got your fossil from and what rock layers it came from and any other information that you can think of. You should also purchase a geology hammer or a geological hammer. These come in a few different forms, but if you're fossil hunting in rocks like these, it's best to have one with a flat front face and a chisel face on the back for splitting rock layers. It's also nice to have a hand lens or a magnifying glass in order to see small details of your fossils that help you better identify it. And let's be honest, everything looks cooler under magnification. So as you gain experience, you might want to add some tools to your fossil collecting kit. Having the right tools can allow you to safely trim down large pieces of rock to take home or completely remove fossils from matrix without damaging them. These tools, like a few chisels, cold chisels, not wood chisels, Many of them come with rubber grips to protect your hands. Brushes like small paint brushes or shot brushes help sweep away fine loose debris from your workspace. There's nothing worse than finding a fossil in the field and dropping a piece of it and losing it in a pile of rocks because your workspace wasn't clean. A small trowel like this is good for picking up loose items and putting them into a bag or sieving them. I like these small flat ones because they're easier to pick up things off the flat ground. Sieves themselves are very useful in separating specimens of different sizes. If you have a big handful of little rock particles and fossils, you can sieve the fossils out pretty easily. For the smallest and most fragile specimens, I like to use little film containers or other large or rigid plastic containers like Tupperware to prevent any breakage. I like to carry some glue with me just in case something gets broken. I can glue it back together. Super glue dries very well, but it's hard to get off later. Elmer's glue doesn't hold as well, but it's easy to get off. It's also great to have a camera. Nowadays, your mobile phone will work just fine if you have a camera on it. It's probably better than the mobile camera you bring anyway. It's best to take photos throughout your whole experience and from multiple perspectives so you can identify features you look at the photos later. This also goes for your specimens when you're digging them out. Take pictures of them in the ground and every step while you're taking them out so you can determine or reference them later. This is all before you pick it up. And you can and should make sketches in your field notebook to help with this as well. Sketches are a great tool to have. And all this and more can be carried in a small, sturdy backpack or shoulder bag like this one. Whatever bag you choose, be sure it's comfortable, and be sure it's sturdy and able to support the weight of any fossils you might find, in addition to your equipment. So before your trip, you should do a few things. First, tell someone where you're going and when you'll be back. Fossil collecting is often done outdoors in places that people normally wouldn't go. And you could get hurt and things could happen. So telling someone where you'll be and when you'll be back is a great thing to do. Also check the weather. Going out and collecting in the rain when you're expecting sun is not good and it'll ruin the day very quickly. These shales around this area will turn to sticky mud very quickly. You should also think about your personal needs. This means not only food and water. If you're going to be out there in the sun all day, it's going to be hot, you're going to be hungry, so you're going to need food and water. But also your medication. If you're on any medicine, you're going to need to make sure that you bring some with you because you're not going to want to be on the outcrop looking for your medication. So when you arrive at the site, the first thing you should do is start an entry in your field notebook. Record information about the site like location, date, weather, what rocks are exposed, and snap a few photos and make a sketch of the site for your reference. Next, you could carry out a quick survey of the site. This means just walking around and deciding which areas look best for excavation. To do this, you can look for any loose rocks and check them out for interesting fossils. You could use your hammer to dig a few test holes to expose some fresh rock and see what fossils are exposed or you're exposing there. Chances are in this area, there's already fossils eroding out. So a quick look around the ground for shapes and textures that are reminiscent of fossils and distinguish them from their surrounding rock is a good place to start. This could be lines and striations on like brachiopod shells or bumps and depressions on corals and bryozoans and things like that. There's a few collecting guidelines. I'm not going to get into the specifics of how to dig up fossils, but I'm going to give you some advice. The first is go easy and take care. It's best to work slowly, little by little, with small hammer strikes. One hard blow with the hammer can easily destroy a beautiful fossil and your day in the field. If time is short or the weather gets bad, it might be best to leave the fossil where it is and return later, or take the whole chunk of rock home with you if you can and work on it there. You should also work from big to little or tough to delicate. This means with the rock you're doing, you want to start off with a big piece and make it smaller and smaller, but it also means your tools. You want to start off using the biggest, heaviest tools you have, and as you move closer and closer to the fossil, you want to use smaller, more specialized tools to work more sensitively and in greater detail to expose the specimen. You also want to work with the rock rather than against it. You want to use natural breaks or bedding planes in the rock to more easily break it away rather than try to go against the grain, so to speak, which will be much harder and might damage the fossil. It's also good to remove a rock containing a fossil rather than the specimen itself. Removing the specimen is usually very dangerous, and you'll probably leave a piece of it behind in the rock. It's best to leave detailed cleaning until later back home when you have a clean workspace. Don't forget to wear your safety equipment. Safety equipment is the most important thing. This could be anything from boots and gloves if you're just picking up fossils to safety helmets and goggles if you're working in a quarry. Fossil collecting is much more enjoyable without injuries, trust me. Also record each stage of your excavation and your experience with simple sketches, notes, photos. Your notes should include any references to your maps and descriptions of the rocks and fossils surrounding your find. If you find something worth excavating, first thing you should do is take a few pictures. Be sure to include something for scale of size, like a quarter or a pencil or your notebook, something that you know the size of, so you can refer to it later and size up the features of your photographs. Next, put your gloves on and remove any overburden using your hands, trowel, or the chisel end of your hammer, or a big pick if you have it. Nothing fancy here, just remove any unwanted debris and make a clean workspace and try not to damage your fossil. After you remove the overburden, you can then use your hammer and chisel with gloves and safety goggles, of course, to remove small fragments of rock matrix. You should assess the overall size and position of your fossil and determine where it is within the rock, and be sure to leave plenty of room for error when you hit with the hammer so you don't damage it. A good thing to do is try hitting a rock of the same type without a fossil in it to see how it's going to react to your hammer strikes when you do try to extract your fossil. When you're working, keep a close eye on the same. Keep a close eye on any rock fragments that you remove because they might contain fossils themselves, the rocks that you chip off. If you're worried you might damage the fossil, the best thing you can do, like I said before, is take it home and prepare it there. You probably have more tools there, and I'm sure you have a cleaner workspace and more time. Do not chip or scratch at the fossil itself. No tool should ever touch the fossil, ever. This will ruin the fossil's appearance and drastically reduce its scientific value. So as you uncover the fossil, like I said before, you want to use gradually smaller tools and gentler methods. A small trowel or a lever or a chisel can be used to detach specimens from matrix. For more fragile specimens, you might use a paintbrush or a small pick. It's best to chisel around the fossil, like I said, and lift it out with matrix rather than remove itself. If it's very fragile or crumbly, you might want to stabilize it with a very small amount of glue or super glue before you dig it out. After you remove your specimen, you're going to want to write a label with information like location, date, and rock unit. You might think you'll remember where it came from, but after you collect a few times, trust me, you will forget. I've been to a lot of places with a lot of similar fossils, and I've forgotten to make a label a time or two, and it's definitely, I've definitely suffered for it. It's always a good idea to wrap your fossil in newspaper or paper towels to prevent any damage, if necessary. And place your label and its specimen into a sealed container. If it's fragile, you want to use a rigid container. If it's not fragile, you can do a plastic bag. But any padding will help you not damage your fossil. In addition to locality information, you should detail all this information in your notebook and record details such as rock type, position of the fossil, its size, and any notes on identification or other relevant information about the site that you have. These details will help confirm the fossil identification later at home, and sketches, again, can really help pinpoint unusual features that may not be visible in your photographs. Well, that's all I have for you today. Hopefully you all learned something about how to collect fossils in the Cincinnati area. If you have any questions or comments, please post them in the comments section of this video. For more information on fossils in Cincinnati, come visit us at the Cincinnati Museum Center or check out some of the references that I spoke about in this video. We're a nonprofit institution and we rely on ticket sales and memberships to function. So if you're not a member, get one. If you enjoyed this video, check out the Cincinnati Museum Center's YouTube page or follow us on social media for more conversations with our curators. Thanks for tuning in. Bye, everybody.